Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. And I want to say welcome to one of our new members. Chris Hoover owns Mass Movers here in Lansing, Michigan. And Chris is actually the winner of SBAM's member sweepstakes that we held last week. Chris and his team won the grand prize, and they're one of our new VIP members. So for the rest of you, check your emails tomorrow. The winners of our third place prize will be notified, and you did have to be an existing member to win. All right, so Brian, at long last, tomorrow is the presidential primary here in Michigan. But I want to dig into one of the things we talked about last week, which was this idea to vote uncommitted. What does voting uncommitted mean?
Yeah, great question, and it's been quite a lot in the news lately because we have seen this uncommitted vote being endorsed, especially in Southeast Michigan or downriver area by pretty prominent people in the Democratic Party urging an uncommitted vote. So it begs the question, what on earth does that mean to vote uncommitted? And maybe you've not noticed, but there's this thing in Michigan law where if you vote or for a presidential primary, when you vote for a presidential primary, one of your options is always uncommitted. It doesn't mean that you leave it blank. It doesn't mean that you write somebody in. There's actually a bubble, and next to the bubble, it has the word uncommitted. Remember, when you're voting for president in a primary, you're not actually voting for that person. You're voting technically to send a delegate to the political party convention in August that is committed to your candidate. So if Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's kind of a foregone conclusion, they'll win their party's nominations here in Michigan, and each of them will go to or will when they win those votes, there's an apportionment formula, and delegates representing those candidates will go in August to their respective political party conventions to win or to vote on behalf of their candidate. Well, if the candidate uncommitted gets enough votes, then there will be some delegates that go to that convention that are not bound to support the candidate in that side. So in this case, where all the action is on the Democratic side of the ticket, where people are upset, parts of the Democrats' base are upset with the president over the war between Israel and the Palestinians. That is inspiring this movement and vote uncommitted, so that when some delegates, then presumably if uncommitted gets enough votes, some of those delegates will go and not be bound to President Biden. So that I would say it's more of a political statement than anything else at this point. I don't think there's any chance that the uncommitted vote gets more than Joe Biden gets on that side of the aisle. But there are some estimates, some pollsters that are saying that it could be upwards of 20 to 30% of the overall vote on that in that primary, in the Democrats' primary. So that would actually send some shockwaves through the president's camp, because the margins of victory in a state like Michigan and what that means in other states are such that they would be nervous on what the fallout is for the fall. So when you show up to vote, whether you're voting in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary, you will have that option of uncommitted. And if you do, all that means is that you want to send people to the political party convention who are not committed to any particular candidate. They will exercise their own judgment on who the best candidate will be to support. Again, ultimately, I don't expect that this makes the difference on who wins or loses. It's more of an indication on how deep the challenges run for the president and with certain elements of his own base.
All right, well, after tomorrow we'll know, and then we can talk about the breakdown and the percentages on Thursday's show. All right, so for like 3.5 years now, we have been talking about in-person work, hybrid work, remote work, and a lot of people have settled into their certain patterns. But a major Michigan employer did just announce 3 days in person a week for office workers. So Brian, who's made this decision?
Yeah, so this was Ford, and I thought it was worth discussing a little bit just on the process that they went through. And it's one that I think, whether on purpose, by design, or just the way it worked out, I think that Ford's process is actually pretty similar to what a lot of companies that have office workers have gone through. So the basically what they've said was they're going to a formal 3 days a week work schedule, but that most elements of office workers have already settled into that type of a schedule. In other words, you're not imposing something that generally isn't already in practice. They let it kind of settle, see how the work was being done. They had kind of announced in-person work requirements and then pulled back on them and then announced them again and didn't really enforce. And then it appears as though they just decided to kind of wait and see how it settled, and then formalized how it settled. So it begs the question, like, why, if it settled that way anyway, then why develop policy? And I think what many companies are finding is that as they have turnover in their workforce, the idea of establishing certain norms so that as new people are coming in, they know what is expected of them, or they don't come in with erroneous expectations on what is expected. They can, in this case, establish a baseline so that new people can be subject to, on day one, what the requirements are, but at the same time not risk losing their current workforce that not just with Ford, it's across the board. A lot of office workers had really recoiled or kind of flexed their muscle in terms of being able to go, having a lot of choices. Workforce shortages, people can go to other employment these days, to not really have to face down that type of altercation. They let it settle. It settled in a place that they were comfortable with. Now they formalized it.
All right. Let's talk about a federal disaster declaration. This was approved for 9 counties in Michigan as a result of heavy storms we experienced late last August. So let's go over this and what it means for Michigan businesses in these 9 counties.
So thunderstorms, tornadoes, flooding that happened in several areas in Michigan in late August, and the dates were August 24th through 26th. The feds had issued a disaster declaration in 9 counties in Michigan, and the state treasury today announced some accommodation made for businesses and individuals impacted in those 9 counties. So if you are in Eaton, Ingham, Ionia, Kent, Livingston, Macomb, Monroe, Oakland, or Wayne, okay, so that's that really that a lot of that 96 corridor where there's a lot of population, a lot of business in Michigan in that area. Well, what the state treasury said today is that if you were impacted by that disaster, it sets you back and you're not in a position to file and pay taxes, that you can request. You have to request. We're sharing the link here so that you can learn a little bit more about it. You can request paying late and filing late without penalty, as long as you get your approval to do so ahead of time. So if you're in one of those 9 counties, check the link and take advantage of it if it's of value to you. But if you can't really make the case or show how somehow the tornadoes, thunderstorms, flooding caused a particular hardship for your business that has resulted in difficulty in paying your taxes on time, well, then this doesn't really apply to you. So this would be just those counties and just those who would be prepared to articulate why it was that the impacts of the disasters on those dates has created a hardship with respect to paying and filing taxes.
All right, thanks for that clarification on who that would impact. All right, so there is news. Another cyber attack is making the headline, this time with a major healthcare provider, and kind of has some far-reaching impact and implication.
Yeah, this is, every once in a while we like to, there's cyber attacks all the time now. They're getting more and more common, and unfortunately, they wreak havoc when they do. In this case, it was one that affects potentially many people, United Healthcare, and and so it had an impact on across, especially healthcare institutions across Southeast Michigan. It's not really known what sort of consumer impact there might be, just that this attack happened and was successful, but what the compromise in data is, we don't really know. The reason I wanted to share this, because if you are a member of SBAM, and you haven't really done a cyber checkup, there is something that you can do for free, right? It doesn't cost anything except for your time, which I know is very, very valuable, but just you can, through one of our partner providers, get what's essentially a credit score on your cyber hygiene, on your cyber practices from Sensei. And really would encourage you to consider doing that, to taking advantage of this, especially since it doesn't come with any cost or obligation to do anything about it, but at least you would know how vulnerable you are. If you wait till after the fact or don't do anything, then of course your options are much more limited. Another thing that you can do with no additional cost, just part of your membership, is to do essentially a scan of your system to determine how much um, how much risk that you have in your system. So how much personally identifiable information is in your system, and this is called Risk Aware. Again, another thing that's just available to our members, where you can scan and find out. A lot of people have some sort of insurance, but they really don't know what it covers, and do they have the right amount? And there's a lot of guesswork. What this says is, hey, personally identifiable information on your system, on your computers, on your server. Here's how much is there, and here's how much damage or potential costs you could have if that information ever got out into the wild through a hack. So a good idea to run that scan. And then finally, once you do, those two things can really help you if you do want to get cyber insurance coverage. The fact that you know how much you need, and that your cyber hygiene has been checked, and presumably you take some actions to limit that. There's some easy and relatively ineffective practices and steps that you can take, or I should say inexpensive, not ineffective, very effective, inexpensive practices that you can take. So just want to take this opportunity to say it doesn't cost anything. Really, we work really hard to put options out there, some benefits of membership to be able to take advantage of without having any additional cost. This is one of those areas where everybody recognizes and agrees, sees, like, wow, there's huge risk here, and it's hard to get people to really focus on it and make sure that they are protected. So let this be a reminder. In this case, healthcare industry, health insurance, I can assure you that they had very sophisticated cyber protection practices in place, and still got hacked. If you're not doing anything, then you're particularly vulnerable, and it's worth checking out.
I did share the link to our website, and that landing page has links to then each of those three services that Brian mentioned. So definitely go check those out. All right, so the next topic today is a Gallup study that suggests unhappy employees are really costing the economy big time. It was an article we shared in our newsletter today, but the projected numbers here of what this is costing us is kind of staggering.
It really is. And I think that probably those of you who are watching who employ other people, intuitively, you know this to be true, But Gallup, so Gallup, who does polling and surveys, um, they put a number to it. So there are many studies and evidence that engaged, satisfied, happy employees that understand their connection to the mission of the organization, the overall purpose of the work, that they produce higher levels of sales and profits, and those who are disengaged and don't like what they do, are unhappy, and are disconnected from the overall purpose or mission of the organization, produce less. So based on their survey, which showed only 34%, so 34% of full and part-time employees were engaged in their work and in their workplace. And so just a little bit of insight on the survey work that they do, that the rest of those employees that are not in that 34%. So in other words, about 2/3 of the workforce, lower levels of satisfaction, less clear expectations, feel more detached from their employers, less connection to its mission and purpose, all compared to 4 years ago. There's been an erosion of that. And the number they put on it, $1.9 trillion, $1.9 trillion. And again, I mean, that's a staggeringly large number. But when you consider that we're talking about 2/3 of the workforce here, that's a um, that's a big number, and it really does add up. So I would imagine that the idea that a disengaged workforce costs you money is probably not a surprise, but to really put that type of a practice on it across the entire workforce, gives you a sense that even a small piece of that is a big deal, and it's probably a big deal in nearly every organization across our country.
All right, so Brian, is it the end of an era for five and dime stores?
It's been a long time since I came across a five and dime store. I read an article over the weekend about one in Marysville, and really small town in Michigan, a very old, kind of old-fashioned five and dime store that is closing its doors for good. And the reason that I wanted to talk a little bit about this today is because at the same time, I've read report after report about how retail sales have increased. And so you'd think, wow, if you're in the retail business, must be going really well. But that in-person, small town retail type of an establishment, that's just not where the trends or the increases lie. Of course, online, and especially with Amazon, where you see these big year-over-year increases, that the net underneath that, there are a lot of net losses, and smaller retailers. I think it's fair to say that smaller retailers are really struggling. And in this case, it's kind of an older concept of variety store, a five and dime, where it just had a lot of you go in, you never know what you're what you're going to get. There's a lot of things that are available. There was a time when like those stores, like other big department stores and malls, and there was a time in this discussion was like, well, will those put the old Main Street businesses out of business? And I think you could argue that it did take a big bite, but really it's the online shopping that seems to have really changed the landscape in such a breathtaking way in a very short period of time. So um, worth noting, with smaller retailers, that really, if you want smaller retailers to be around, people have got to patronize them other than just at Christmas time. And so that's a kind of a reminder, a bit of a sad reminder in this case, with one closing its door for good. It looked like the owner was around retirement age, and it's just not the type of business that really you could probably successfully put up for sale in the current environment and the way that the trends have been going.
All right, a great reminder to support your small businesses all year round. All right, it's now time for Data Monday.
All right, we got a fairly short Data Monday. There weren't big releases, but I held on to from last week just a the National Federation of Independent Businesses do a national survey that they put out monthly. So you heard about SBAMs, which is specific to Michigan. This is the national number. So just wanted to share a few of the outcomes from that. They ask what's your single most important issue that you're facing, and so right at about a tie, and they've been running neck and neck for a while: inflation and quality of labor. As you can see, inflation being the biggest issue or problem that people face has gone down, and quality of labor is held pretty steady. And you'll see that taxes and cost of labor are numbers 3 and 4 on this survey. By the way, in ours, when we ask a question kind of similar to this, we ask about the economy and then rising costs. So people perceive inflation in a certain way. For us, we're talking about rising costs come in a lot of different ways, and sometimes, like rising cost of personnel, for example, people don't necessarily classify that as inflation. So but economic concerns about the strength of the economy took number 1 in our most recent survey, and then rising costs or inflation, and then availability of labor as number 3. And then here we've got the small business optimism index and outlook for general business conditions. And as you can see, both of those are, over the last couple of, let's say going back a year or so, you could even say that the general business conditions, generally improving since they bottomed out in the pandemic. But just as of late, a little bit, it seemed like it might be coming back a little bit, but flattened out or even rolled over a bit. And then the optimism index it came down during the pandemic, and it stayed lower. A few little ups and downs in there, but it stayed somewhat lower. And then I like this question that they ask: is it a good time to expand? I think that takes a lot of factors into consideration. What the market opportunities are, what's happening in the political system, the policy world, availability of labor. There's just so many things, costs and shrinking margins or expanding margins. Is this a good time to expand it? It's like an all-encompassing type of a question. And as you can see, this hit a really, really low number, and it's seems like it's trying to make a bit of a comeback here, but if you're to look historically, that it is still, even though it's higher than it was over the last few quarters, it's pretty low historically speaking. It's down in the type of level where it was during the Great Recession. A couple other things that are not from that survey. So just this slide and one more. This just really kind of caught my eye, that showed the if you were to go back 20 years and look at essentially what equal investments in real estate, or not all real estate, but in single family home, in your home, and also the S&P 500. So like think of like an index fund, S&P 500, as compared to inflation. You'll see inflation in white had been pretty flat and then went up a bit more as of lately. And look at how the real estate in the S&P 500 both went down for a while. So in other words, negative returns, lower than inflation. And then both recovered, but S&P 500 actually quite a bit. So just kind of an interesting perspective that inflation as of late has overtaken a lot of earning potential. By the way, this is not investment advice, but if you're to look at the way that inflation has kind of stolen away buying capacity, the areas, stock market, and homes, which are like long-term investments people have, either like in their 401ks or their residence, which for many people is their single largest asset. For most people is their single largest asset. It's actually even taking into consideration the Great Recession has performed pretty well. And then this is just kind of, think of this as like a precursor for inflationary pressures. So if you look at the like the inputs for manufacturing, goods and services, there's 4 different classifications. And so what goes into manufacturing, but then also like think of like business to business transactions. So manufacturer makes something and then sells it to another manufacturer who puts it into their process. And so as you look at these prices, you'll see that that they're all pretty stable, all pretty level. So at least in durable goods, um, this would seem to indicate that inflationary pressure is off quite a bit. So hopefully a good indication that that the expectations that we're in a more sustained period of normalization when it comes to inflationary costs, that there's evidence growing that that is the case. And we need it. Like we need some time for income overall to catch up with the rising costs of the last couple of years. We need it to stay level or low in terms of the percentage increase for a few years for people to feel like they're getting back on top of things. Looks like just one data point, but one that I thought was perhaps an indication that we are generally headed in the right direction on that front.
All right, thanks. A final reminder that SBAM will be in Ann Arbor on Wednesday of this week. We have an owner-to-owner event, and this will be at the University of Michigan President's Residence. So kind of an exciting location for an owner-to-owner event. You can learn more on our website, but we'd love to have you if you are in the area. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here on Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.